Welcome to Pleasureology Island. I'm Free Thought Steve. Thanks for stopping by. This is the second in my series of programs attempting to help people who are leaving Christianity, who have left Christianity, and are trying to live happy lives as ex-Christians, which would mean as realists rather than delusionals. Because Christianity, like all religions, is a delusion. And what do I mean by a delusion? I mean when people choose to believe or can't help believing that the imaginary is real. Schizophrenics have delusions. They see and hear things that aren't there, but they believe that they're real. They believe that the voices they hear are real, or the hallucinations that they see are real. And they don't have any choice because there's something biologically wrong with their brain. And it's a tragic situation. But religious delusionists are delusionists by choice, even though we would have to say that most religious people don't have the free will to not be religious. They are, because our free will is constrained by our emotions. And we cannot do something that our emotional brain will not let us do. I cannot jump off of a cliff because my emotional brain will not let me do that. I get to the edge of the cliff and my emotional brain says, okay, Steve, that's far enough. You're not going any farther. And so I don't really have the free will to jump off that cliff. My emotional brain won't let me do it. And, you know, I appreciate that. I'm grateful to my emotional brain for keeping me from doing something that could potentially kill me. That's, you know, my emotional brain is being smart in this case. But our emotional brain can also be enslaved to delusional ideas that have been programmed into us from childhood. When we were born, we didn't have a fully developed intellectual immune system. Our mind didn't possess an immune system to protect it from being infected by ideas that weren't true, ideas that were based on the imaginary. Our mind didn't have any concept of the difference between imaginary and real, and if our parents told us something was real, we believed them, because that's the way a child's mind is programmed, to believe its parents, because that's the safest thing for a child to do under most circumstances. And it isn't until we start reaching the age of puberty or thereabouts, maybe sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later, that we start to develop the ability to think for ourselves, the ability to question whether ideas that we've been taught are true or not. And it's at that point that we really need to have some guidance from our educational system, telling us just one very, very simple idea, but which nevertheless is probably the most forbidden idea for schools to teach, because most school systems are still under the control of Christianity. But if they weren't under the control of Christianity, the school systems should teach us the very simple idea that the imaginary is imaginary and the real is real. And there's a difference between the two. And we can tell that difference. We can know what that difference is. And we should believe that what's real is real and true. And we should believe that the imaginary is imaginary. It's something that's been made up by human minds and therefore it cannot be proven to be true. What do we mean by saying something is true? It's very simple. We're talking about a statement. And the statement is a sentence like, it's raining outside right now, or God exists. Okay? Two different kinds of statements there. A statement is just human words strung together in a sentence. It's raining outside right now. Okay, that has a meaning for our mind. Our mind can understand what that sentence means. We can visualize the idea that it would be raining outside right now. And similarly, when we put together two words, God exists, because we have a cultural idea of what God is supposed to be, we can form a picture in our minds of God existing. Even though God is supposed to be some invisible, non-physical, spiritual being that we cannot see, nevertheless, we've been shown enough pictures of God as an old man with a beard, a white beard, that we can visualize that old man with a white beard, invisible to us and non-physical, but nevertheless we can visualize that imaginary being as really existing. So the sentence God exists has meaning for us. It can create a picture in our mind of what the sentence means. Just like we can create a picture in our mind of what the sentence it's raining outside means. Okay, so these are two sentences. Both of them can create pictures in our mind. Does that make them true? Just because we can visualize what the sentence means, does that make the sentence true? No. If the sentence happens to be, it's raining outside right now, the only way that that sentence can be proved to be true is by seeing if the sentence accurately describes the reality that we're living in. So we have to look out the window or go outside. We have to look out the window and see if we can see rain falling from the sky. And if we think that might be just an optical illusion, we should step outside and see whether we get wet or not. And then we can decide whether it's raining outside or not, whether that sentence corresponds to the truth about the existing reality. If it does, if we go outside and we get wet, we can hear the rain on the roof, we can see it through the windows, we go outside and we get wet, then we can come back inside, dry ourselves off and say, yeah, that's a true sentence. It is actually raining outside. And we can count on that. That's actually true. But maybe it's sunny outside. We look out the window, we see sunshine. We don't hear rain on the roof. We step outside and we're nice and dry and warm. And we come back inside and say, no, that sentence was false. We have proven that that sentence is not true, that it's raining outside right now. Okay? But the way that we have proven whether that sentence was true or not was to actually check reality, do a reality check, do a fact check on that sentence. And that's called comparing a sentence with experience. We go outside and we see if we experience getting wet or not. So this is either validation of the sentence, it's true, or falsification of the sentence, it's not true. All right, God exists. That's a different sentence. How are we going to fact check the existence of a being that has no physical existence whatsoever? We can't see God. God could be anywhere. God could be everywhere, but we can't know because we can't see God. We can't feel God. We listen, and I've never heard God talking to me in reality. I've never heard a voice coming from outside talking to me saying, Steve, hi, this is God. No. Uh, we don't have a hotline, 1-800-ASK-GOD. Call them up, and we would have no assurance that the person on the other end of the line was really God or not anyway. Could be somebody just trying to make 85 cents a minute, by pretending to be God. Anyway, God is a metaphysical statement. It's raining outside is a physical statement. Either there's physical rain falling from the sky or there isn't. God exists as a metaphysical statement. Meta means beyond, basically. Beyond the physical or after the physical or outside the physical. Non-physical. A metaphysical statement is a sentence that purports to describe the non-physical. And the non-physical cannot be observed by us with any of our senses or any scientific instrument. If a scientific instrument can detect something like X-rays that our senses can't detect, but we have a scientific instrument that can detect the radioactivity of a piece of uranium, whatever, we know that radioactivity is some kind of a physical stuff. It's a physical energy of some sort. Something's happening in the physical world that causes that kind of energy that our scientific instruments can pick up. Our telescopes can look out into the universe and see galaxies way the hell out there that we couldn't possibly see with our naked eye, but we can see them with the telescope. So we know there's something physical out there that's causing that light. So, this is what we should be taught, in elementary school. Is there two kinds of statements? Statements about the physical world that can be proven to be true or proven to be false. And statements about non-physical entities, non-physical beings or worlds or whatever, and those statements cannot be proven to be true or false because we cannot observe the entities that those statements are about. We can't observe God. We can't observe heaven and hell or an afterlife. We can't observe angels or devils, any of that stuff. Because it's all supposed to be non-physical. So where do we get the ideas that these things exist? If nobody's ever really seen them, and nobody can, verify their existence at all, where do those ideas come from? They come from our imagination. They come from the human imagination. All metaphysical statements, all statements about non-physical stuff, are statements made by the imagination. They've been created by the human imagination. And there is no proof that any of those statements are true. Because there's no way to prove, there's no way to observe whether that statement corresponds with the non-physical reality that it's pretending to describe. So no statement about God, angels, devils, the afterlife, heaven, hell, whatever, none of those statements can be proven to be true. And so what religion does, religion is a series of false truth claims. Religion claims falsely that a whole series, a whole interconnected system of metaphysical sentences and ideas are actually true, and that we should believe that they are true, and that if we don't believe that they are true, bad things will happen to us. That's the basic intellectual original sin. To claim that the imaginary is real and to believe that the imaginary is real and to coerce other people or try to persuade them to also believe that the imaginary is real. The imaginary is not knowable. The imaginary is unknowable. There's no way we can know anything about it. There may be nothing at all that we can't see or detect with our scientific instruments. There probably is stuff out there that we haven't yet invented. Well, consciousness is one of those things. Consciousness is a field of energy of some sort that we haven't yet developed the scientific instruments to measure or detect. However, we know that consciousness is real because that's what all of us are experiencing all the time. So to say, I am conscious and you are conscious is a true statement. That is a true statement that the two of us can verify because we know we are conscious. Okay? So there must be things, and consciousness must be a physical thing of some sort. It must be a physical energy of some sort that we haven't yet figured out how it is that the neurons in the brain produce our field of consciousness. But they do. The neurons in our brain produce our field of consciousness, and as soon as our brain shuts off, when we go into dreamless sleep, which is a deep form of sleep before we start dreaming, consciousness absolutely disappears. It just is not there until our brain moves into a different mode and starts producing dreaming sleep. But our states of consciousness are very clearly connected to the states of our brain, and our brain has to be activating the consciousness creating circuits of the brain in the nerve circuits and the neurons, the nerve cells of the brain, in order for us to experience consciousness and to be aware of the fact that there is consciousness. So there are undoubtedly things in the universe out there somewhere that we haven't yet developed the scientific instruments to detect. But until we develop the scientific instruments to detect them, we know nothing about them, and we cannot make any clear statements about them. The only statements we can make have any validity are statements based on observed physical events. We can observe that the brain is in different physical states when our consciousness is in different states. And so we know that the brain produces consciousness. And the other aspect of the unknowable is that people imagine the unknowable and then they call their imaginings real, okay? They imagine things for which there's no evidence, and then they call those imaginings real, make a false truth claim that these imaginings about the unknowable, like any form of God, of any of the religions in the world, we know absolutely nothing about them because we cannot observe them in any way, shape, or form. And yet people make false truth claims all the time that they know about these unobservable entities. Now, they base those truth claims on a couple of things. They base it on an old book, okay, ancient manuscripts of things that people imagined about the unknowable thousands of years ago. People imagine that they know about the unknowable. Religion is a product of the human imagination. Religion is the human imagination imagining the unknowable and then calling those imaginings true, which they are not, because no statement can be called true unless it has been validated by observation and experience. This is a basic philosophical position that is called empiricism, and that comes from the Greek word empiros, which means a trial or a test of something. Empiricism means that statements have to be tested before they are judged true, and that you have to test them by comparing them with reality and seeing whether they correspond with reality. And if they do, then they can be called true. They have been validated. But religion consists of a whole bunch of imaginary ideas that came from the imaginations of people who died thousands of years ago, who thought the earth was flat and had four corners, and thought that the sky was solid, and thought that the stars were embedded in the sky, and that the sky rotated around the earth, and the stars rotated with it, and then the sun and the moon rotated with this thing, and just beyond, and that was solid. They thought that was solid. When you read in the Bible about the firmament, the stars in the firmament, they're talking about something real and solid. And on the outside of the firmament, above that, is where God is supposed to live. That's where heaven is supposed to be. And heaven was thought, and hell was thought to be in the center of the earth. And so these were the people who were trying to imagine the unknowable. And the human imagination is very good at imagining the unknowable. Every culture on earth has had its own religion and had its own way of imagining the unknowable, non-physical stuff. But those imaginings are all different from each other all around the world. And yet people feel certain that they have experienced something like this, experienced some kind of a spiritual entity. And so that's the other kind of evidence, besides the ancient manuscripts written by people who've been dead for thousands of years. Besides those manuscripts, people will have present day imaginings that they imagine that they can sense the presence of some spiritual being like God. And so Christians would have us say, would have us believe that God really exists, because Christians say, I feel that Jesus came into my heart, I feel that God spoke to me, I could feel the presence of God, and so forth. There have been some interesting psychological experiments done. People have the feeling of some kind of spiritual being present. This is a very common feeling. It's a form of self-hypnosis. It's the brain imagining something so vividly that the brain believes that it's true. The emotional brain believes that it's true. I've had this very powerful emotional experience. Something must have caused that. What's caused it is their own imagination, imagining something so vividly that their own emotional brain has responded to it with a powerful burst of emotion. And what is happening is that the emotional brain is going back to the feeling of being a child and the feeling of being protected by our mother or our father or all our grandparents, some member of the family. In fact, we can't even remember, perhaps, we can't visually remember being in that situation, and yet our emotional brain remembers how wonderful it was to be held on somebody's lap, to be cradled. This is what every infant, every child desires, is to feel safe and protected by being held by a parent. And this is the same feeling that when we imagine that God is protecting us, or Jesus is protecting us, or the Virgin Mary is protecting us, we get the same feeling of safety and that nothing can happen to us, nothing can harm us. And this is what makes religion so seductive. This is one of the primary reasons that people love to believe in the imaginary idea that they're being protected by spiritual beings because it makes them feel so safe. And safety is our most primary emotional need. I talked about Abraham Maslow, the humanistic psychologist, last time. When Maslow made up his list of emotional needs, safety was the first one. And the second one was belongingness, belonging to a community. And so you feel safe when you are surrounded by people that you feel love you and will take care of you. And that's also something that a religious community provides. A religious community provides belongingness. And people will love you and take care of you. And the only condition for that is that you have to share their precise delusion about the nature of the imaginary, the nature of the unknowable. You have to share their delusion in every respect, every major respect. And then they will love you and protect you and consider you part of the community and will consider you a morally good person so that you can have self-esteem. So religion feeds our self-esteem if we're accepted and approved of by the community because we share the community's delusional worldview. But there's only one thing that we can believe about the unknowable that is actually true, which is that we know nothing about the unknowable. That's the only true statement you can make about the unknowable, that which cannot be experienced or observed in any way. But humanity, the human species, has been believing in various imaginary versions of the unknowable ever since we evolved our imaginations. And our imaginations seem to have kicked off into high gear about 60,000 years ago. Anatomically, modern humans have been around about 300,000 years. But it wasn't until about 60,000 years ago that humans start to show signs of having developed the kind of imagination that could create religion. And this is when people start making cave paintings and other forms of art, that it's clear that humanity by 60,000 years ago had developed our linguistic abilities and our abilities to think and our intelligence probably as well as we have intelligence today. They were probably just as intelligent as we were, and they had imaginations and they had questions and they wanted to know how things worked. And they didn't know. They could see what happened, but there were a lot of things they didn't understand. Where does the weather come from? Where do storms come from? Why did the seasons change? Why do the stars move across the sky at night and the sun disappear and then come back? Why do we die? Why do we live and die? All kinds of questions. And how can we find animals to eat? Because our ancestors were hunters and their lives depended on finding animals. And how can we make there be more animals for the next hunting season than there were the last hunting season? So they invent a combination of magic and mythology, imaginary stories about the supposed powers, the invisible powers that might control these things, that they had no idea where they came from. They didn't know why there were more animals one year than the next year. They didn't understand about biological reproduction and how the seasons affect that and how the availability of food affects the population and so forth. There were all kinds of things that they just totally didn't understand, and the human mind is not satisfied with saying, well, I just don't know about that. The human mind wants to have an answer. The human mind has a hunger for feeling sure that we know what's going on. Then we can feel in control of things a little bit more. If we feel that there's our spiritual powers that control the rain and the storms and the lightning, then maybe we can try and control the weather by offering sacrifices to the imaginary beings that control the weather. So human beings have had religion for at least 60,000 years. When the Aborigines arrived in Australia, say 40,000 years ago, they already had a full religion that they brought with them. And every tradition has developed its own set of myths, own set of imaginary spiritual beings and stories about them, and its own set of magical rituals for trying to influence these imaginary beings. And every culture believes that their own set of mythology and their own set of magic rituals are the ones that work. And so if you're born into a culture, you learn the imaginary mythology and the magical rituals of that culture that are going to keep you safe, that are going to give you long life, and that are going to give you an imaginary afterlife. Cultures cannot accept the idea that life comes to an end, so they can't visualize themselves not existing anymore, so they imagine that we go on existing in some non-physical realm after we die. Every one of these ideas is a metaphysical truth claim, which is a false truth claim because it is metaphysical. It is not physical. It is not verifiable. It's just superstition. It's an imaginary idea that people start believing, and then they get really scared to not believe those imaginary ideas and to not do the magic rituals the way they should be done, and they get really scared if anybody else in the community says, "Oh, I don't believe in this mythology. I don't believe in these magic rituals." Oh no, then we believe that the imaginary beings are going to punish our whole community if we allow these people to openly say that they don't believe in the imaginary beings. So we have to coerce them into sharing our delusional belief along with us, because otherwise we can't feel safe. And if they refuse to do that, then we have to exclude them from our community, send them away, get them out of here, because we don't want the gods to punish us for their unbelief in the gods. Now, an interesting thing about the proof that people offer that these imaginary beings are real, the proof is always some kind of internal experience that their own brain and their own imagination and their ability to hypnotize themselves, if they happen to be suggestible to self-hypnosis or to hypnosis by other people, they can hypnotize themselves into having these subjective experiences, and they feel so, the emotional brain feels like, oh, that being was really there. That imaginary parent being that we longed for, who would keep us safe, was really there. And so they say, well, you've got to believe me because I really did have this experience and it was real to me. And therefore you have to believe that the imaginary being that I had the experience of is real. And the answer to that is, okay, you've had your experience of a being that none of us can prove actually exists, but you imagine that that being spoke to you, and we believe you, that you had some kind of an internal experience that was very real to you, that actually occurred in your consciousness, and that you were very conscious of at the time, and you felt absolutely certain it was real. We agree that you had that experience. We're not trying to deny, we're not trying to say that you're lying to us about having had that experience. You know, you could be lying to us, but let's assume you're not. No, well, you seem to be sincere about it. You sound sincere, you know, and there's no reason we should think that you're lying to us about having that experience. But we could say that the experience you had tells us not something about whether any such beings actually exist, What it tells us about is your brain and your consciousness and your ability to create that kind of an experience for you. We can all create that kind of experience every night when we dream. We have dreams that are very real to us as we're dreaming them. We're absolutely certain that they're real. We will wake up in a sweat from a scary dream because we were so certain that it was real. So there's no question that our brain is able to give us experiences that have no reality at all, but which feel completely real to us. And some people have better imaginations than others, and they can give themselves that kind of experience while they are conscious, because they want to have that kind of experience. And so they will create it for themselves. But that tells us about nothing except your brain and your consciousness and your ability to imagine something that isn't actually there. And maybe they say, well, it is there. I had the experience. You've got to believe me. It's true. And then we could take a look at all the other cultures in the world where people have the same kind of experience, where they truly believe they had some kind of spiritual being right there with them, but it just didn't happen to be the Christian God or Jesus, because they lived in a different culture. And so the spiritual beings that they imagined to come inside them were different spiritual beings. And we can't say that they didn't have these experiences. They're telling us they did have those experiences. So we have to accept the fact that, yes, their brains were capable of giving them those experiences as well. Does that prove that the gods that they imagined they had the experience with actually exist? Because that's exactly the same proof that the Christians are offering. The Christians are saying, yeah, God and Jesus exist because I've experienced them inside me. Well, all right then, if people in other cultures are experiencing other gods, then we should have to agree that those gods exist too. So I went to Google AI and I printed out a list of different gods that people believe they have experiences with. One that isn't on here, that I read about in a different book, a book on the Eskimos of Greenland. One time the Eskimos in Greenland, the anthropologist was there visiting them and recording what was going on. And there had been a storm up there that had been going on for a week or more, and nobody could go out to sea because the storm, the wind and the waves, was just suicidal. So they couldn't go out and get any food. And this was back in the 1920s, I think, something, 20s or 30s. And oddly enough, Eskimos don't have refrigerators, and they didn't have any food in the refrigerator to eat when the storm came. They were used to going out and catching their food every few days from the ocean, where all the animals lived that they hunted. And so they were really literally on the verge of starvation if this storm didn't stop. And so their mythology was that somebody in the community must have done something bad, and the gods were punishing the community for that. And so the only way to make the storm stop was for whoever had done that bad thing to confess it to the rest of the little community. It was like maybe 20 people, probably 20 people, maybe 25. So they all gathered. And so what had to happen was that the person who had done the bad thing had to confess it, and then the shaman had to talk to the mother of life who lives at the bottom of the ocean and find out whether or not that was the sin that they were being punished for. So they gathered everybody together, and the shaman got there, and the shaman went into his trance, and people started confessing their sins. Oh, I told a lie. I stole some food, maybe something like this. And they would tell that to the shaman, and the shaman would go down to the mother of all life who lives at the bottom of the ocean and would ask her, was that the sin that we're being punished for? And the mother of all life said, no, that's nothing. That's not, I'm not punishing you for that. So the shaman would have to come back up and say, okay, that wasn't it. Somebody, tell me something else that you've done. And finally, somebody confesses to some serious thing, some serious infringement of the taboo, like having sex with a close relative, violating the incest taboo. And that's a serious enough thing. The shaman takes it down to the mother of life under the sea and asks her, was that the sin? And mother of the sea said, yes, that was a sin. So these people then have to confess that, have to be sorry for it. They probably have to offer a sacrifice to the mother of life to show they're sorry and everything. And then the party breaks up. And sure enough, within a day or two, the storm comes to an end. And their belief that the mother of life has forgiven them for this sin, and that this was the sin that caused the storm, that's all taken care of now. Their belief is validated, and they can resume life. And so this is a superstitious belief, a belief about the unknowable and the imaginary. But the shaman said he went down there and talked to the mother of life at the bottom of the sea, and there's no reason to believe he was lying. So maybe that's where the mother of life really lives. The mother of life lives at the bottom of the sea, and the Eskimos are right. That kind of testimony is just as good, just as valid as any Christian's testimony that he saw Jesus, talked with Jesus, and so forth, or talked to God. All right, so another example of a really powerful internal subjective experience of the so-called spiritual comes from an entirely different place. Instead of the cold Eskimo climate, it comes from the warm climate of Haiti and Haitian voodoo, or Vodun. In Haitian Vodun, this is an African religion. This was a religion that was brought across from Africa. The slaves brought it across to Haiti, and they still practice it. And the central ritual is they get together for a big party, and there's a lot of drumming, and people dance to the drums, boom, 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 for hours. And the suggestible people, the people with good imaginations, believe at some point they feel one of the African gods settle on them and ride them like a horse, is how they describe it. They're possessed by this particular deity, and they start walking around acting like the deity, doing the things that the deity would do, and absolutely the deity is incarnate in them, is being embodied in them. And they believe this is truly happening to them. So you couldn't get much more of a vivid internal experience of the existence of some kind of God than having them actually take you over and you turn into them. And so these are the gods we would have to believe actually exist if we're going to accept their testimony that they've been taken over by this god. Papa Legba, when he rides a person, the devotee suddenly appears as a frail, limping old man leaning on a crutch or cane. They may speak in a raspy voice and ask for a pipe and rum. Baron Samdi and his family, spirits of the dead who are famous for their rowdy, transgressive spirit possessions. A person ridden by one of the Baron Samdi's families will dance provocatively, crack vulgar jokes, drink raw rum steeped in hot peppers, and mimic a corpse. But then there's another African god who must exist because he possesses these people, some of these people, Ogu, as the warrior spirit of iron. A person ridden by Ogu displays immense physical strength and aggression. They will handle sharp machetes or swords with ease, strike their own bodies without feeling pain, and demand rum or cigars. Dambala Wedo, because he's the primordial serpent. A person possessed by Dambala will hiss, slither on the ground like a snake, and climb up trees or the central pillar of the temple. He doesn't speak, only making reptilian noises. Ezeli Frida, the spirit of luxury and romance, a woman. When she rides a devotee, when she spiritually possesses a devotee, the person acts extremely refined, vain, and coquettish, demanding expensive perfumes, powder, and pink clothing. Ezeli Dantor, the fierce protective mother. A person ridden by her becomes mute or speaks only in guttural, stuttering sounds like kek, 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 reflecting the legend that her tongue was cut out during the Haitian Revolution. They will fiercely protect any children in the room. And then if you go to other cultures, so all of those African gods, they must be real if we're going to accept that the experience of being in contact with a god makes a god real, that's evidence that a god really exists, rather than just being someone's imagination. They still, they do this in Brazil. They have the candomblé religion in Brazil, and in Cuba and the Caribbean, it's called Santeria or Lukumi. Practitioners are mounted or ridden by the orishas. The orishas are the gods. In addition to African traditional religions in the area of Nigeria, the Yoruba tribe, and so forth, they still have spirit possession over there. And in Asia, Hinduism, in various regional and village traditions, particularly in southern India, ritual possession is common. During festivals like Thayam or Kabadi Atam, deities like Mariamman, Kali, or local village gods temporarily possess performers or priests to grant blessings and answer prayers. Chinese folk religion and Taoism, mediums known as Dan Qi enter deep trances where they are possessed by Taoist deities or historical heroes or spirits. While possessed, they may perform acts of self-mortification to demonstrate spiritual immunity and write out divine talismans. Global shamanism. Across Siberia, Korea, and various indigenous American cultures, shamans enter altered states of consciousness to allow spirits, animal guides, or ancestors to inhabit their bodies or retrieve lost souls or heal the sick. So all of these gods must be real. If people are having spiritual experiences where they believe they are possessed by these gods, they must be real. Okay? Or conversely, we could say that the human brain and the human imagination and the human emotional brain are capable of working together to create states of consciousness where people believe that they are possessed by non-physical spiritual beings, imaginary beings. And yet, because they believe in the reality of those imaginary beings, their emotional brain will make them believe that they have been possessed by those imaginary beings. And that's exactly the same thing that happens with Christians. And so either we're going to accept all deities everywhere as being real, or we're going to say they're all figments of the human imagination, which is my position. My position is we should never believe any metaphysical claims whatsoever. What we know about the unknowable is only one thing, that we know nothing about it. And that, of course, is the position known as agnosticism. Agnosis, non-knowledge. Agnosticism means we don't claim to have any knowledge about the unknowable. The unknowable is unobservable. The unobservable cannot be described truthfully. We cannot truthfully say that any statement corresponds with the unobservable. So anytime anyone makes a truth claim that involves an unobservable, non-physical entity of any sort, that's a false truth claim. If they are claiming that something is true, actually true, about unobservable entities, that's a false truth claim. The Bible is God's word. That's a false truth claim because God is unobservable. We don't know if God exists, if any gods exist. If gods exist, what they're like. We don't know anything about them. The only thing we can say is we do not know. So agnosticism is our attitude toward metaphysical claims if we are realists. And if we're realists, our attitude toward claims about reality, about physical reality, is that they are true if and when they are validated by observation and experience, and preferably validated repeatedly by repeated observation and experience. So we can say that, yes, this is really true. We can see this, we can touch it, we can hear it, we can taste it, we can feel it, or we can detect it with our scientific instruments every time we look for it, then we know it's there. So my position is agnostic realism. I am totally agnostic about all metaphysical claims. Metaphysical things might exist, they might not. We have no way of knowing. And if they do exist, we have no way of knowing what they're like in any way. We have no way of knowing what they would want us to do. Okay? But realism is we can trust the evidence of our senses as long as we keep our eyes open and we look at the world carefully, which is a really important thing to do. A lot of times we're lost in our head and we're thinking about stuff and we don't perceive the world accurately. And that's why Zen meditation, the art of thought clearing meditation, mind clearing meditation, and seeing reality precisely as reality is such an important skill for us to learn, especially if we have grown up in a delusional culture, a culture of delusion that has taught us to believe that the imaginary is real, which is the original sin intellectually. So the only salvation for us as realists is to simply stop believing that the imaginary is real. Be able to identify any statement that is in fact imaginary, either in part or entirety, and stop believing that any of those imaginary statements have any truth validity at all. They have none. There's only one thing we know about the unknowable, which is that we know nothing about it. We know about what's real. So my position is militant realism, that it's time to stop letting other people make false truth claims about the unknowable and get away with it. When they make false truth claims about the unknowable, they're just calling the imaginary real. And we shouldn't let them get away with it. We should say, no, that is not true. Remember, you can find a detailed summary and outline of this talk by going to the video description box below the video on YouTube and click on the link down there, and it'll take you to a Google page. Then you look for File and you do Print, and you'll have a detailed summary generated by AI of this talk. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.